Hello, I'm John Arnold. This is photowalkthrough.com. This is tutorial 5, chapter 2. We're working again today on our Weir at night HDR or high dynamic range image. Last week we looked at all the images that went into creating this single image, and we talked about what's important in capturing those images. Today we'll develop that merged image into the final picture. As usual, the source images for this are available on the photowalkthrough.com website. Remember, every image we've worked on, every tutorial we've made, has its own page there. You can download all the source files, and there's references there to all of the chapters and videos that we've done. So pop to the website to get the zip file full of the JPEG images. Remember, I've not provided the raw files. The raw files would just be too large for this image, because there were, I think, 10 raw files that we used to merge. So I've given you a zip file full of the converted raw images, and you could use those to produce your HDR image and follow along. Where I'm going to start today with this image is I'm going to start right away by cropping it. Now, just in case you've not seen this before, what you've got here is an image with no toolbars. All I've done to get the toolbars to vanish, by the way, is just press the Tab key. So if I press the Tab key, the toolbars come straight back. That's a really useful way of working. If you just want to stop a moment, look at the image as large as you can fit it. You know, find your way around the image a little bit and just see whether or not it's going in the direction you want it. So Tab key just makes your toolbars go away. So cropping. This is the crop tool here on the left. You can get to it quickly by pressing the C key. And one of the things I'm very hot on is image proportions. I find that as much as possible I try and keep the image proportions to a couple of standard sizes. Let me just move this out of the way so you can see a little better. The reason for that is that unless you're getting your images framed specially, you'll find that you're having to buy off-the-shelf frames, and off-the-shelf frames come in one of 2 or 3 sizes, so or at least proportions of sizes. So 8 by 10, that sort of thing. And your typical image comes out of the camera in 3 by 2 format, so that's 1.5 to 1 ratio. So in this case, it's 1.5 across to 1 high, and that's just the ratio. I mean, that's the actual inch sizes are irrelevant. It's just the ratio of number of pixels across the top to the number of pixels down the side. So when I'm cropping, what I typically do is I actually enter into this width and height box at the top here. If I wanted 1.5 to 1, I would go 1 in the height, 1.5 in the width, and I don't bother with the resolution box. The resolution box really isn't that important. And then when you draw the cropping window, it will constrain the crop to that size, which is extremely useful if you're trying to make these images to put into standard purchase frames. In this case, another standard size, 1.25 to 1. That's a better crop ratio for us. There's just this little bit of image down the left hand side here that isn't really doing much to the image. What I'm seeing when I look at this image is I'm seeing the shape of the branches here and the shape of this little sticking out bit of rock here, just framing the scene nicely, and all the light is inside that, and it's almost like the light is bursting out from that. So having cropped that, you can apply the crop by double clicking inside the marching ants, or you can just press the Enter key on your keyboard. So that, I think, is a reasonable crop for this. Just a nice framing with those branches and that bit of rock, and there's a nice little bit of reflection down here at the bottom that I quite like. There's a little bit of detail in this little island bit that I quite like. I definitely want these branches here to be full of detail, and obviously I want all this water to look very milky around here. So that's my plan, is to try and achieve all of that. So having cropped it, the next thing I think I'm going to do a little bit of selective lightning, because although we've done a merged HDR here, I'm still not satisfied that the lighting is quite as even as I would like. So I'm going to just drag the layers palette back in so you can see it, and I'm going to create. Now this always goes off the bottom of the screen. Let's do it up here. New adjustment layer, and I'm going to do a curves layer, which is going to be a lightning layer, and that's going to pop up this curves dialog. And rather than I could lighten that way, and that would lighten the image, as you can see if I turn the preview on and off. But I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is drag that dot off. I'm just going to press OK, and that layer at the moment is doing nothing at all. If I turn the visibility on and off, I'm going to change the blending mode to screen, and I'm going to drag the opacity down a bit. So that's going to be down to what I'm looking at now when I'm deciding on what opacity I want. I'm looking at the parts of the image that need some lightening. So I'm looking at maybe a bit of the water here, certainly the tree up here, just generally that sort of swathe of image through there. I don't want too much light in the corners because I want sort of an enclosed feeling about this. I want the everything outside of this sort of framework to be much more dimly lit. So if I just drag the opacity up and down, what I'm trying to do is get a point where those bits that I'm interested in are nicely lit. So about there, and I know it's done too much here, but I'm going to correct that now. Go into my layers palette again. I've ended up with about 38% opacity on that screen curves layer, and I've got the layer mask selected there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a brush. The brush tool is B. I'm going to grab black and white on my keyboard, in my colours rather. I'm pressing the D key to grab black and white, and then I'm going to switch the white and the black over, pressing X to get black as my top colour, and then with my Wacom tablet I'm going to just paint out the areas where the lightning didn't need to be so strong. So particularly there. I'm not so keen in this corner here on the way that the light's sort of orangey on those. There's some branches that are closer to the camera that are in front of the tungsten lighting in the background, so they're not lit. There's no detail on them. They're not all that interesting. I don't really want them, so I've just painted out the lightning layer there. I quite like the way these rocks here at the foreground are sort of going into silhouette. So I'm just going to take away the lightning on the front of those as well. And I know I'm painting out detail, but that's okay. I'm just interested in trying to keep it. There's like an explosion of light going on in here, and I want it to look like it's sort of shining outwards from that area of water there. So I'm just going to just gently paint away some of the lightning around the edges, so that the light is more contained within. And that's quite nice the way. When I painted along the bottom there, we just paint it back in. When I painted along the bottom there, I found I was getting a sort of a gradient across the bottom of the water. If you just look at this bit of the image here, and I turn that layer on and off, it's a very subtle effect, but it's just slightly darker at the bottom there. It just slightly pushes the eye back into the image. So all those little details can keep the eye in the image, and just pushing the light in from the edges. Just painting black on the layer mask there. A few light strokes here and there, but if I finish up, you can see my light and mask there. If I turn that on and off, I'm going to keep moving this layers palette in and out so you can see what I'm doing. I like you to see more of the image than of the tools, because that's really what this is all about. It's about making the images look good. Now, having done that, it's actually looking a little bit over bright here to me now. So I'm just going to make my brush smaller. I'm using the square bracket keys on my keyboard to make that brush larger and smaller. Remember, some European keyboards, those keys are not so readily available, and you might need to rebind them. I will cover that in a tutorial at some point, how to rebind the keys, but not today. Right, I think that's probably pretty good for lightning. This is still broad strokes at this stage. The next step I'm going to do is going to be a little bit more detailed. Actually going to zoom in a bit and work on some of the branches. So what I'm going to do now, I'm racing through some of these bits because you've seen them before. It's really all about the image, not about the techniques at this stage. I'm going to make a new layer. This is going to be a dodge and burn layer. So this little icon down here, the little sticky notes icon, creates a new layer. It's going to be dodge, burn. And the way it becomes a dodge burn layer is set the blending mode to soft light there. So that's now a soft light layer. It's got nothing on it at the moment. I'm going to drag it out the way. I'm going to grab a brush. I'm going to grab black as my foreground colour, and then I'm going to paint in the areas that I want to burn. So again, corners, just that, like I saw before, where I painted a little along the edge and just got a little bit of darkening along the bottom there. Just make a little bit more of that, sort of make a sort of a triangle shape there, so it leads the eye down and around that area. Almost like the way water flows. Your eye almost flows around the image, almost the way water does. Would flow downhill. I don't know what I'm talking about here really, but anyway. Let's zoom in a little bit. This branch here, looking a little bit flat, a little bit silvery grey flat. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try and give it a little bit of shape. In the way that this branch here, we've got a dark area on the back and we've got the light all hitting the right hand side of the trunk. I'm just going to emphasize that a little bit. All I'm doing here is actually adding contrast. I'm painting a little black on the left side of that trunk, a little bit of white on the right side of that trunk, and I'm going to do the same along the bottom of this branch here. And I've just overshot, I've just introduced a little halo, so I'll just undo that slightly. Use a smaller brush, that was my mistake there, I wasn't using a small enough brush. And the light is all from over here, so it's this right hand side of the branch here needs to be lit. So a little bit of white there, a little bit of black on the other side, a little bit of black on the top of the branch there. Oh, I went too far. A bit of white there. Blend those two together a little bit. And then I'm seeing a little, perhaps a little too much lightness on the top of that branch there. And also perhaps a little too much lightness in these twig bits here, just in this sort of foliage area. Not that there was much foliage, this was taken in winter time, so there isn't any foliage on the tree, but it's just a little bit of sort of collection of twigs, I guess. But as I paint black over them, you can see that if I turn that layer on and off, you can see it just introduces a little more definition into that clump of foliage there. I think I might have gone a little too far with that. I'm going to grab the eraser tool and just gently, that was too much, just gently back off that change a little bit. The joy of doing these dodge burn layers this way, by the way, I've had some people write to me and say, there's another way of doing a dodge burn layer. You can do a new layer with overlay mode and fill it with 50% grey. Yes, you can do that. That's a perfectly good way of doing it. No criticism of that at all. The reason I do things this way is that the dodge burn layer being soft light, first of all, soft light is almost exactly the same effect as overlay, but less strong. If I just make this layer, if I just drag my layers palette back in, this dodge burn layer, instead of soft light, if I choose overlay, you'll see that it does exactly the same sort of thing. It's just stronger. The effect is just stronger. So the dark area I've painted on the top there now is quite a lot darker, and the dark area there is quite a lot darker. The light area is a lot lighter, and that's fine. It just means that you need to paint slightly less hard when you're using your painting tool. It just so happens I prefer the soft light way. It means I can be a little bit more heavy-handed. And the other thing about the filling it with 50% grey, I actually prefer to use a completely empty layer with nothing in it. 50% grey, just to explain the soft light and the overlay modes, and hard light in fact, anything that's above 50% grey, so anything lighter than the mid-grey, will get lighter still. Anything that's darker than mid-grey will get darker still. So it adds contrast, makes the darks darker, the lights lighter. Same is true of overlay and soft light. So 50% grey will have no effect on the image. So when you're told to create an overlay layer or a soft light layer or a hard light layer, you're quite often told to fill it with the layer neutral colour. In fact, if you do, sorry, this is going out of shot again. Let me drag this over here. If you do new layer, if you do it this way, which is the sort of the longhand way of doing it, you can actually use you can set the blending mode here, and if I set the blending mode to soft light, it gives us this tick box: fill with soft light neutral colour 50% grey. You can do that, and that will mean that that layer starts off having no effect on the image. But the downside to doing it that way is that in order to undo your changes, again you paint white to dodge, you paint black to burn, but to undo those changes, what you end up needing to have to do is you have to paint 50% grey on it to undo the change. And as you can see in your colour palette, colour chooser, you've only got two colours, black and white, and it's useful to be able to switch back and forth between black and white. But if you want to paint 50% grey, the only way to do it is to click on there, get the colour picker up, type 50%, well, it's not the only way to do it, but it's the easiest way to do it. get 50% brightness, and then you've got 50% grey in there and you can paint with it. And then you want to go back to black and white by hitting that or pressing D, and you're constantly switching back and forth between black and white and grey. Instead, the way I do it, you use an empty layer. You've got black and white as your two colours that are available to you. You can switch back and forth with the X key, and if you ever want to back off a change, you use the eraser tool to erase it back to transparent instead of painting 50% grey on. I just happen to think that's a little bit easier. Up to you whether or not you agree with me. But so that's just to address a couple of the people who've emailed me. Quite happy with the overlay method. Quite happy with the 50% grey method. I just happen to think this makes the workflow a little bit easier. Anyway, right. Sorry, whittled on too long there. Back to my brush tool. Back to black and white. I'm just going to add some contrast on these tree trunks. Oops, that was wrong. Control Z to undo it, Command Z on a PC, on a Mac. Just painting, I'm sort of helping the light out a little bit. Now that trunk there is sort of light against a light background. I think instead of helping out the light, I might actually darken that, just in the areas where it's already dark, just to add a little bit of contrast and drama here and there. This is really a very exploratory sort of experimental process, dodging and burning. You find that, well, I find that what I do is I paint black a lot just to see what happens if I burn an area, and if I don't like it, I either erase it or I try painting a little white over it, see if that improves things. And what I've learned as time goes by is that areas of detail, like these in the tree where I mentioned earlier that I was painting a little black in there to improve the definition, I find that detailed areas, a little bit of burning, very light burning, I'm pressing very lightly on the tablet here, can just bring out that detail and just add a little more contrast and just add a little more interest and detail to the image. But sometimes you just need to go with where the light is. Sometimes you just need to say, right, where's the dark bit? Do I just want to paint, do I just want to burn in the dark bits just to make the image stand out a little bit more? What's already there, enhance what's already there, really. That's the key. Right, let's just, I've done quite a lot of editing to the tree there. I'm just going to remove just a little more detail on those rocks there. As I say, I actually want them more silhouette than anything else. That's pretty good. We've almost lost entirely the detail that was on the foreground trees there. I didn't want the orange, but the colour's going to go in a moment anyway, because I'm going to do a gradient map colour, a coloured gradient map rather. I'm just going to take out a little bit of information in the corners just to keep the eye in the picture. That's pretty good. Okay. Right. Now the next step, we've done our dodge burn layer. Let me just turn that on and off so you can see what we did. You can see I've darkened these corners to keep the eye in over here. I don't really need to darken over here because this shape here keeps the eye in, and we've got a dark corner here already, so that keeps the eye in as well. So that's only really needed a little in the corners. I may have overdone that a little bit, but you can see what I'm trying to achieve anyway. The next step after the dodge and burn is let's do the gradient map. Now, a gradient map. Let's talk briefly about what that is. If I go to, you remember you can add your adjustment layers using this button down here. I'm doing it up here so that you can see it in the video. New adjustment layer, and I'm going to go for gradient map. And what this is going to do, it's going to map the lighter values in the image to the brighter values in the gradient, and the darker values in the image to the darker values in the gradient. And essentially the way it chooses what are the lighter values and what are the darker values is by doing a straightforward black and white conversion. Now normally with a black and white conversion I would go through the channel mixer and I would decide which channel gave me the best detail and which channel gave me the values that gave the image the best composition and all the rest. In this case I didn't do that, and the reason why is that image is almost black and white already. You've only got to look at it to see that there isn't really a deal of colour in it. It's mostly greys. There's a little bit of green down here, but frankly It doesn't matter in this case. I didn't need to do a clever black and white conversion, so I'm not bothered with that. What I'll do is I'll just let the gradient map do a standard desaturation in order to determine what are the brightness and darkness values. So we're going to say, I'm just going to leave that as gradient map, and I'm going to press OK. And you can see that the first gradient it gives us is black through to white, and you can see the darker areas have gone black, the lighter areas in here have gone white, and that's a pretty straightforward gradient. But I'm not happy with that. I want to do a 3-step gradient with a blue tone in it. So let me just drag this out of the way. Oh no, first of all, you can get back into your gradient by double clicking there. And I'm going to click on that gradient. When I click on that gradient there, it pops up this gradient editor. Now, it's way too much on the screen here for you to comfortably see it, but you'll just have to try and see around all these dialogues. You can see I've got here, this is a gradient that I've defined earlier, and what I'm going to do is just show you how I created this gradient myself. It actually starts from the plain black through white. And the way I've added a midpoint is I just click on the gradient there. This is a standard tritone, and the midpoint I've created is going to be the colour that we pass through. So we'll pass from black through to this colour, through to white. And this colour I want, if I click on that colour there, I want a sort of a slaty blue colour. Let's just quickly looking around this colour picker, by the way. You've got all your hues up here. This is a standard sort of hue saturation value, hue saturation brightness and value being the same thing. You quite often see HSV or HSB mentioned. That's hue, saturation and brightness. So hue slider up here, and then we've got over here, we've got saturation left to right, and we've got brightness top to bottom. So obviously completely bright saturated, completely dark saturated, completely dark unsaturated. And what I'm after, this is a really instructional thing to do, by the way. Just understanding the difference between saturation and brightness is key. And the minute you start doing this, you'll find that all your friends have no clue what you're talking about. If you say, oh, that carpet I chose the other day, yeah, it was a really desaturated blue, they'll have absolutely no clue what you're talking about. Best way to do it, best way to explain it is to show them this. I spent a good half hour the other day explaining to my wife what I meant by desaturated blues. Anyway, right, that's by the by. So I want a sort of a desaturated, quite dark, sort of slaty blue here, which has got a little bit more cyan in it than that. There we go. About there. Right. If you look at the gradient now, you can see that we've got black at this end, we've got blue here, we've got white here, and I can drag this gradient around and you can see what it's doing to the image in the background, just that little bit of the image you can see. As I drag because this is quite a dark blue here, so I want it more towards this end of the gradient because I don't want to completely remove the lightness out of the image. Once I drag it around, if I drag it to the right, we're introducing more dark tones and less light tones. I drag it to the left, we're introducing more light tones. And you can also drag the midpoints of these gradients around if you want. And in this case, I think what I'll do is something like that. I'm looking at the water here, and I'm just thinking that I want to make sure I've got as much detail as I can whilst keeping it sort of creamy, that water creamy colour I'm after. Just don't want too much blue in the dark areas. So there we go. I think let's leave it like that just for the sake of time and brevity. Okay, that's now our gradient map, and as you can see, that's given us a blue tinge to all the midtones. The blacks are still black, the whites are still white, but all our midtones have got a blue hint to them. I think probably from there we're almost done on this image now. Let's just zoom in. I think we could probably do with this isn't the way the original version of this went, by the way. I'm now thinking on my feet in this video because I've not done things exactly the same way as I did before. I think I need a little bit more contrast in there. So let me just add an S-curve to this. So I'm going to go to Layer, new adjustment layer, curves. This is going to be a contrast. I need to be able to see, so I have this curve window set large. I'll shrink that down a little bit there. I should be able to see the areas I'm interested in are here, where we seem to have lost a little bit of contrast. S curve looks like this. Normally, I don't do much darkening on the midtones. I normally do darkening. I drag this dot to the left down here, so that the only tones I'm darkening are the very darker ones. In this case, it's actually the midtones where I want to introduce the contrast. So I'm keeping the dots nearer the middle because it's the midtones I'm working on. But it will naturally, because of the shape of the curve, it will naturally increase those darker tones as well. I could probably correct that way. Not going to bother. You can see I've got more contrast in the middle here now. That is intentionally overdone. The reason I've intentionally overdone it is that I can now back off that change by dragging the opacity down. So I can just then slide the slider up and down until it looks the way I want it. So I'm thinking there-ish looks pretty good. What else do we need on this image? I think probably just a couple of final tweaks on the dodge burn layer. I'm just going to grab the dodge burn layer. I'm going to grab my brush, grabbing black, just see if I can paint some detail in on that water on there. That's just bringing out some lights and darks in the water there. Little there. Maybe bring out a little more contrast in those branches there. Just sort of doing very light black strokes out. I want to make sure there's still some light on the trunk of this tree here. Painting a little white again now. Just trying to bring in, lead the eye to see the things that are there, see the detail that's there. And I think that's probably a pretty good place to stop. There's a little bit of detail along the top of that water there that I could bring out as well. That's a good place to stop. There we go. Right. So that's our first HDR image. I hope you feel you've learned something from that. That was, as I say, it didn't quite go the way the original image I worked on went. I worked on that original image for a long time before I eventually settled on how I wanted it to look. So this gradient that we've applied, I didn't quite apply it the same way. There's a couple more layers in the original image that did some silly things that I ended up working on top of, and therefore couldn't remove without completely destroying the rest of the image. So I've attempted to recreate the same effect, but doing it as if I'd known what I was doing from the start. And in this case, it has come out pretty well, but not quite as well as the original, I think. Anyway, the next image we choose will be one that I pick. Remember, you can vote for an image for me to work on next on the homepage. We have a what's next section on the homepage. I'll put up a couple of images there, so you can see what's possible, and you can give me some direction on what you'd like to see. But the next image will be one that I choose, and then the one after that will be the one that you vote on. So don't forget to vote for us on Podcast Alley. They reset the votes every month, so please keep voting if you're enjoying the show. If you're finding it useful, please do keep voting for us. It does get us more subscribers, and please also tell all your friends about us. If you're enjoying the show, pass the word around. And also, if you've got any images that you're proud of, that you've perhaps done as a result of watching the show, please post them to the Flickr group. Join Flickr. It's a really, really useful community for photographers. Join the photo walkthrough group. Post any images you've got there. Try to keep it to no more than 3 a day, though. And also, please, if you find yourself wanting to learn, the most valuable thing you can do with your time for learning photography and learning post-processing is to give and receive, particularly give, critique. It does concentrate the mind on what you like, and it helps you develop your own photographic style, which is probably the loftiest goal of all. Develop your own style. So thank you for listening. I will catch you in the next tutorial next week. Thanks a lot.